Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 pre-panel for the Willamette Pinot Noir auction. My name is Sam, and I'm the Pacific Northwest Specialist for JancysRobinson.com. Today, I have with me Wynne Peterson-Nedry, winemaker and co-owner of Ribbon Ridge Winery, Gina Hennen, winemaker for Adelsheim, and Thomas Savre, winemaker for Lingua Franca. So these winemakers not only have their own winery lots up for auction on the 10th, they also have some collaborative auction lots up. And these collaborative lots are one of the things that I see as being one of the most special parts of the barrel auction. So one of these lots is the Fate and Friendship collaboration that was made, handed between the three of these winemakers, with fruit from Adelsheim and Arlen Vineyard, actually, who Thomas used to make the wines for and who Wynne took over from, and whose vineyards are right across from Adelsheim. So these guys clearly have a lot of collaboration, a lot of love that goes into collaborative projects, which is really significant to winemaking culture in Oregon. But before we talk about that, I've asked each of them to have a recommendation on hand of someone else's 2021 who has an auction in the lot. So Wynne, Thomas, would you go first?
My recommendation is Crowley. I love all the wines that Tyson makes. I know that he has also done quite a bit of Chardonnay in the past. That's one of the things that he's known for, is his Chardonnay as well as his Pinot. So the Crowley wines in general are super delicious. He's always done wonderful things. And the Entre Nous is the one that I've got right here. This is actually 2019. Sorry, I didn't get the 2021 yet. But I'm gonna look out for it. I don't think it's even released yet, but Tyson Crowley, delicious wines. Thank you.
Awesome. We'll look out for those in the auction too. Thomas?
At the auction in Oregon, one of my favorite peeps are the Bergstrom family. Love them. I think Josh and his estate family is doing a great job for the valley, making a beautiful wine. Very close to Arlen Vineyard in Adelsheim as well, in his estates. So yeah, I would advise to get to this wine for sure.
And then Gina, I know you had something special. What did you end up bringing?
Yeah, I brought a bottle of the Alexandra Chardonnay, since we are doing a collaboration with them for the next year's auction. So we just met with Trez and his team a couple of weeks ago now to work on the blend for the 2022 Chardonnay.
All right, so that seems like you do collaborative lots pretty frequently.
We like to make things really difficult for ourselves. That's pretty common. Yeah.
Have you worked with the collaborative lots for a long time, or is that more recent?
Yeah, we've done a collaboration lot every year that we've been able to. And actually, we've done one with Thomas, now two with each of you, I guess. Yeah. So maybe next year we all three again. Yeah, no, we really like doing them. I mean, it's great to get together with, everyone in the valley knows each other really well. We get to talk about winemaking style and decisions that people made throughout the vintage. And it's a good learning opportunity, I feel like, for us.
All right, that's awesome. Thomas, when you're doing collaborative project, what is it you take away most from these projects?
One of my favorite things about Oregon in general, and always has been since growing up in the industry here, has been the collaborative nature of all the winemakers here. There's nothing that people are shy about discussing with one another. And if somebody needs help or wants assistance, you've always got your friends and your co-winemakers or fellow winemakers to help you out. So I think that collaboration in general is one of my favorite things. Being able to see what other people are making and how blends can come together from two different sites is always surprising, because the things that you think might go together don't always go together. So getting together and using your brain trust. So all three of us got together for this collaborative blend with the Arlen and Adelsheim fruit. And it was fun to see which wines worked best and which wines that we thought might be awesome weren't our favorites. So
Speaking about 2021 more specifically, and then extrapolating more generally, is there, when you do a collaborative lot, you guys all have different pick decisions, yes? So what is it, when you're blending, what are you looking for? And can you tell that there are different hands involved there?
I think this is a interesting and complex piece of the collaboration, because sometimes you can collaborate at different level, and for those type of blends we collaborate after the wine was done, made, decided in each our cellar. So we pick barrels and we just check the lot and such. So it was very interesting, and that's where like you just kind of see the result and see what can work. And that's where it's complex and fun, because you're like, okay, like, you know, Gina worked like that, and then we work like this, and then we're trying to like, okay, those wines have this type of characteristic, this type of shape, and then we try to go to something that is like absolutely delicious and unique. So yeah, I think this is a complex part, and then finishing the wine, you know, like bringing it to the wine, it's important, you know. Sometimes we underestimate the complexity of finishing wine, but like small volume, very unique for this kind of auction. Okay, we have to like move the wine. How are we going to do that? And how are we going to finish this? And how do you doing this style or you style? And we have this discussion, and it's very important. So a lot of discussion going through this for this mini project.
mhm.
Who's the person who gets to freak out about bottling for okay, Gina.
I'm just gonna say I have not freaked out about it. Thanks,
Gina's
Gina.
done it for both of our
Yeah.
lots. Thank you, Gina.
You're welcome. Yeah, we've been bottling all the collaborations here. It's not easy. These are tiny little lots that are almost not of commercial scale, right? I mean, they're so exclusive, but that's kind of what you got to do. So that's what we've been doing. I think Wynne made a really great point earlier about the blending process. It is really interesting to see how they do or don't come together, because we all kind of pick some things. You know, I generally know Wynne style. I generally know Tomas style for winemaking. We'll grab a couple things and then like a wild card or two just to see. And sometimes that's the one that wins, even though we expected it to not even be part of the conversation. So it's like a discovery process, I think, when we're doing our tasting, which I always really enjoy.
So you said something, you said these are small lots, they're almost not commercially saleable. And I wanted to just give the audience a rundown. We were talking to Morgan earlier. She said that there is 40% of buyers for the auction are retail, 22% are restaurant, 15 are country club. And I am curious if you could pop it in the chat, not the Q&A, which section everybody works in, and if you've bought and how you've used these lots in your own programs. But let's get into the 2021 vintage. That is why we're here. 2021 came off probably the worst vintage in terms of natural disasters in Willamette Valley wine history. I think we can all agree that we've never seen anything quite as bad as 2020 for that. But that meant that going into 2021, it was pretty special. And I just wanted to ask you guys what the feelings leading up to the 2021 vintage were like. Wynne, do you want to start?
Sure. I think the anticipation was really high, especially after, not only battling wildfires, but working in what most people, you can't make wine remotely. And everybody in 2020 through 2021, frankly, was kind of on COVID lockdown. So not only are you battling wildfires and COVID from the year before, but you're still kind of in COVID in 2021. So everybody's just kind of looking for a really awesome Hail Mary. And honestly, I think we kind of got it in 2021 with the vintage. It was beautiful. There was a tiny bit of rain in September that kind of refreshed everything. The chemistries were wonderful. The ripeness was perfect. It was one of those vintages where you could be like, not today. How about tomorrow? We can wait a little bit longer. And just that kind of picking decision out in the vineyard where you aren't super rushed because of rain coming on. And it's also not really, really hot in September anymore, was pretty ideal. So you could target exactly what you wanted in the vineyard. And then harvest crops weren't huge. So that quantity was relatively easy to work with in the cellar as well. Instead of being bombarded with fruit, you're just kind of, you know, coasting through this beautiful fruit and making the best wines that you can. So I loved it. It was a great vintage.
Awesome. Gina, Thomas, thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like we were just happy to be out in the vineyard picking again. I mean, that you can't really underestimate how important that is. Everyone works so hard to grow grapes throughout the year, and then to be able to make them into wine is just, you know, the last step, really. So I think for us, it just felt good to be out there again and be able to like make these decisions and, you know, have the problems come up and be able to deal with them was really welcome, I think, on the heels of 2020. And then to Wynne's point, like we just got a slam dunk. I mean, it was, everything just lined up for us. The chemistries were great. The flavors were excellent. It wasn't too hot. It was just like this perfect halcyon year.
Thomas, can I ask you, we've heard the chemistries are great. Will you tell us what chemistries were like compared to other vintages?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So whenever we start like, you know, harvesting, we obviously analyze grapes and juice in so many different ways. Some like, you know, sensory, we taste grapes, we see how the ripeness, and then we look at analysis. So we basically run a couple of like metrics to see the ripeness, and you know, ripeness is something that can become pretty subjective, different winemakers, and that's why we all make different wines. But there is a point in where it's like can be very like, you know, as everybody said just before me, like a slam dunk or just like an easy like understanding of like, well, this is just perfect. And for me, I was just, you know, telling my colleagues like that was last time I saw this analysis where my textbook at school, and textbook at school, they don't show you challenge vintage, it just show you like what's perfect. And if you go a bit in detail, you know, like the pH were just in range, perfect. The malic acid were perfect. Like the nutrition, all the nitrogen and such were for yeast nutrition was perfect. Brix level, 13% natural. I mean, at this point, you're just like, okay, what do I do? So you just start the harvest in such a good, on the right foot, that it's really, really hard to like, I mean, you know, to make a mistake per se. And so you really have, you're really such in a good trajectory to like make good wine. And that was great because 2020 was, you know, to everybody's statement, was quite hard. But the vintage 21 was, you know, the season was not easy.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. I've heard of the 2021 season. People have described it as both a warm year and then a relatively moderate year. And I think Wynne even has a chart. We were talking about this beforehand. What I think takes on this can be different. What are your guys's so Wynne, would you tell us about this chart?
So this is something that we use for Ribbon Ridge Winery. We do some vertical tastings of our Pinot that go back to 2003. So for a couple decades now, my dad has been putting together he's one of the analytical data nerds of the Valley. So collecting crop load stuff from our vineyard here on Ribbon Ridge, as well as weather data. And so a lot of the weather data for the growing season heat is dependent on growing degree days, which is basically heat accumulation throughout the growing season. So all of these numbers are based on our crop loads and growing season heat for the vintage. So 2021, as you can see here, is kind of surrounded by some warmer vintages. It's a slightly smaller crop than say 14, 15, and 17. If I were going to put it I would probably put it closer to 2003, but that spot was already taken. So, but it's smaller and it's slightly cooler than the warmer vintages, but it did have, as we can all remember, that giant heat spike. So I think that influenced the growing degree heat quite a bit as well. It's just accumulation of that. So it kind of puts 2021 in perspective with the other vintages here.
So looking at that, and knowing that growing degrees days, we can discuss whether or not you see a high heat spike and you have a plant either keeps ripening or shuts down. But I think the heat spikes were why people got the perception of 2021 as quite a warm vintage, even though when you taste it, my perception is that it's incredibly well balanced. The acid is very fresh. So what was it? Was it timing, or what was it about the heat spikes that were significant but didn't create overripeness or jamminess in the fruit?
The timing, I think, the timing of this, it's, you know, the in the phenology and the cycle of the grapes, the heat spike came just right at, I think, if I remember correctly, just depending on the region, of course, but right at set or just after bloom. And at this time, you know, the vine is like, I would say like kind of pushing a lot towards the grapes, you know, instead of doing the green tissue. And so at this point, you know, there is no ripeness happening at this point. That ripeness is not a concept yet. So we're talking at least ripeness to make wine. But we're talking more about like growing grapes and growing like those little berries and stuff. So we were not yet in sugar accumulation or risk of dehydration. And it was, you know, and quite honestly, it was for us the first time. I mean, for me to live, and I probably think in Oregon was the first time to experience those type of heat, and we're just observing, and it didn't really affect the vines at all at this time, because they were in a good spot in their cycle. It would have been later, end of August, September, when, you know, veraison would have happened, that would have done very different things for the grapes with dehydration and such. But no, we got pretty lucky on this one, and to that point, then it didn't affect the chemistry.
That's awesome. Is that how you guys felt as well?
Yeah, if anything, it kind of shut down the vines during those big heat spikes. Grapes don't want to do any, like no plants want to grow and respire a whole bunch when it's that hot out. So I think it just kind of put everybody to sleep for a little while during that hot time, which is fine. Like Tomas said, it wasn't a super sensitive time for the grapes yet. So
I just want to add, for anyone who wasn't here, it was so hot. It was 116 degrees
for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah. So that was
3 days.
the hottest 3-day period in, I think, in the state's history, sustained, for Portland, certainly. And you had, this isn't funny, you had people who were dying because the city is not built with air conditioning. And yet it was the point, there was the point in the vine's ripening cycle where it would matter the least. So on that side, at least, we were quite lucky. All right. So did this, has the heat spikes ever happened before? Is this was that a new one?
That was
I mean, for
definitely
me, that was a new
one.
Go ahead, Gina.
Yeah, just for the area. I mean, we've gotten days above 100 here and there. It's usually not sustained. I just remember walking outside and being overwhelmed by the heat, right? But it happened at like the only time where it wouldn't have affected the grapes. And for us, it was just, we were just, you know, witnessing it. Like we were just waiting to see what happened. We were tasting things, you know, in the lead up to harvest, trying to look for any problems, and there just weren't any. So I feel like we were very fortunate that year. I think we got it owed to us, right? So it's not even part of the discussion of the vintage for me. Like when I'm thinking about it, I have to remind myself, oh my God, that's right, that happened in 21, because it's just not part of the flavor or the profile of the wine.
What were your pick dates like compared to recent vintages for 2021? Thomas, you look like you're thinking hard.
Yeah, no, we picked beginning of September to first week of October, something like very similar to 19, very similar to 17. Yeah, and very similar vintage to me, at least. Yep. So kind of, I mean, for me, with my 10 years experience in the Valley, I think I would call 21 as a modern classic Oregon vintage for me. In terms of, like, just like we don't pick in mid-August or end of August, never pick mid-August, end of August, and then starting when the core of the harvest is mid-September to mid-October. This is like great because that means like we have a good Indian summer, not too much rain. End of September, that we always like kind of, oh, is that gonna happen? Yes, no, and then this didn't happen that much. We had a little bit of rain, but didn't affect the quality of harvest. So yeah.
Yeah, ours started on September 10th and we finished Riesling and all our later stuff by October 5th. So yeah, right in that nice sweet spot, just like Thomas was saying. I would compare this vintage, if I had to like a 2018 or a 2008, which are a couple of my favorite vintages from the last 15 years. Nice concentration, but still great acidity. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful.
We started picking a little bit earlier, but we make sparkling wine, so that's always going to skew the pick date results. But it was, I think for me, it's the ripening that happens the last 3 weeks to 4 weeks ahead of picking is that's like the key parameter, right? Like those are the conditions under which those grapes are really ripening. And that's when they're respiring a lot of their acidity and accumulating sugar, and all the other chemistries that are important are happening. And it was just really like textbook. It was so great, and I think that's why the 21s for me are going to be such an ageable vintage. So I'm really excited to see how they last. The acidity is really nicely balanced, which I think makes for very ageable wines. And Oregon wines in general, especially from the Willamette Valley, have that naturally. I mean, we have a library, we can go back to 1970s, and they're just, they're still really amazing. So I think this will definitely be one for the history.
So, about average in terms of harvest date, what do you think characterizes this vintage and makes it? I know we were talking about ideal chemistries, but in terms of flavor profile and structure with tannin, acid, and the perception, what do you think characterizes the 2021 Pinot Noirs? And then we can do Chardonnays as well.
I like how vibrant they are. I mean, they're really, for our wines lean a little bit more towards the red fruit spectrum. They're very fresh. They're very youthful, and they have a lot of texture without them being weighty and heavy on the palate. So for me, that's sort of the best of all worlds, because you have this ageable wine that's really well built and elegant and kind of a sleekness about it. So I've been really enjoying everything that we've had from the vintage. I mean, across the valley, it's been so fun to taste everyone else's wine.
I think one of the things that I've always loved about these slightly warmer, slightly smaller vintages is the concentration of flavors. So it's not dilute at all. And some vintages, depending on rainfall or crop loads, can be a little bit leaner. But these ones are like lush and rich without being heavy. So just like Gina said, yeah, the acidity the chemistries are great for aging. So you do want tannin for aging, but you also want acidity for aging. And the combination of both of those doesn't always happen, but this year it did. So it's that best of both worlds, the best of the cool climate and the best of the riper vintage coming together to make this good apex of acid and tannin and concentration.
Come on,
Yeah, it's like for me, I'm always seeking an Oregon classic, in a sense, because it's like, well, was trained in Burgundy and such. So I'm always like trying to compare, Oregon. We need to compare Oregon to Burgundy sometimes with quality, both called Pinot and Chardonnay. But I'm like, okay, well, where are we at? And I love 21 because of basically what Gina and Wynne said. It's concentration, ripeness, fruit, aromatics, like kind of very Oregon, like a little bit sun. There is fruit in those wines, but yet they're not heavy. But they have concentration, but not heavy. It's like very nice and precise with good length and nice acidity. Which sometimes it's what I love about Oregon, and what can define and identify as a region, for sure.
I find the tannins in 2021 to be really fine as well. I don't know if that's been your experience with most of them, but it's like almost powdery fine on the palate. And then I wanted to ask about Chardonnay as well. Do you think this was a great red wine vintage? Do you think it was a great white wine vintage? Or is it a great everything vintage?
Great everything. Great everything, yes.
Yep. Some of my favorite white wines that I've had in a long time have come from 2021.
And why is that? I'm sorry. Thomas, you go.
No, I was just making a comment of like, as I explained to you just before, I was very happy because I had a tasting with a very amazing producer from Burgundy that came on Monday at the winery, and he was like, well, first time you taste a 121 vintage, and he was like, wow, it tastes like Burgundy. He was like, and so I was like, okay, great. So I don't know, maybe it works. Maybe I was happy, was pleased, but no, I think sometimes when there is a quality and quantity, because it's a less than average in crop, but it's like the quantity was here too. It's not a small vintage per se, and so that's a good vintage for both colors. So I don't make other wine than Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So I don't know for Wynne has more experience with the thing, but wow, it was great all over the board for sure, at least for us.
Okay,
yeah.
When you go and Gina, you go, and then I have a question on the Burgundy comparison.
2021 for whites, just like Thomas said, were gorgeous. We make all kinds of different whites, and for each one of them, the concentration, the flavors were great. There was beautiful acidity, there was texture because of that concentration, and we did have a slightly smaller crop than normal. I'm not sure if the smoke from the previous year did something weird with the hormones in the plant, and we got slightly less than we normally would, or maybe it was the heat dome. But the concentration was there because the quantity was slightly smaller. Freshness, acidity, really great balance. There was really not a whole lot of heavy lifting to do in the winery. You didn't have to do hardly anything, which makes my job a little easier, but it's also very enjoyable to drink in the end.
Yeah, no complaints on 2021. Gina, white wine vintage at Adelsheim looked good as well.
Yeah, it was good. Also a great Syrah vintage for the Willamette Valley. No, I'm joking. We have a tiny little bit of Syrah, but no, I mean, it was good. And I think I have nothing really to add. No notes. I think Thomas and Wynne covered it. In a year where things kind of just work out, it's generally true for everything that's being grown in the area, right? So it was good. 21's good. Buy 21.
I like your point on Syrah though, because it's not a given everywhere. We have the genetic makeup of the varieties we grow here are pretty close. So the flowering happens pretty close together. But I think other areas you're like, oh yeah, well, if you get rain in the spring, you have a poor set on this variety, but not necessarily this variety. So going forward, of course, Willamette Valley Pinot Noir is incredible, but as there are more things planted, who knows? Maybe it's like, oh yeah, it's a really awesome Syrah vineyard or vintage for Willamette Valley. I did want to touch on the comparison to Oregon to Burgundy though, because we were talking about this before, and I mean, just like the value proposition. Let's talk about the value proposition of 2021 Oregon and our top wines versus Burgundy's top wines. Did prices go up much? Do you guys think that the 2021 vintage is when you should invest in cellaring? Tell us about that.
Well, I think it's an interesting concept right now, and at one point I'm going to lose some friends in France, but that's okay. I have both passports now, so. But I think Oregon make 1% of the wine in the US, and I think the aura and everything that we just discussed, like some amazing vintages, a collaboration effort on the winemaking is incredible. And I think that we are today in Oregon in the point where there's no shame to compete against Burgundy in terms of quality at all. And I think the one we make, and I just mentioned it, whenever you have winemakers like Pierre-Yves Collamore that have wineries that are very successful, and they come and they're like, wow, it's amazing wine. And they're like, wow, it's just like home. And you're like, okay, so it's a very interesting concept, but still, I think our offering in Oregon is still valuable compared to some, obviously, like Burgundy prices. And as much as, I don't want to, sometimes it's not their fault, the demand, the way how AOC are basically drawn and set in Burgundy and in France in general makes it complicated for them to make more wine for the demand. And so obviously, like, what happened is the price inflates. But I think today in the domestic market in the US as an opportunity to buy wine as incredible value for the same quality and both colors, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So I think this is amazing. I think that Oregon, we know it, and I think we need to keep working on it. And Oregon is slightly growing, but it's such a small region that has like such character. We are defined by like our little community and our land, and I think we have still a lot of things to prove, but we're in a very good direction.
And I would speak to the ageability, especially of this vintage. As everybody's already mentioned, the acidity is there, the tannin is there, the concentrations, the flavors, the brightness, the freshness is there. I think this is one of those, as Tomas said, classic Oregon vintages that we'll want to be cellaring for a long time. It reminds me a little bit of, say, a 98 or a 99 from the earlier times of Oregon, and those are still beautiful these days. So if we can hold on to them and not drink them all before we get to 20 years from now, 25 years from now, I think they'll still be alive and vibrant.
I wasn't around in 1998, so I don't know what that vintage looked like, but if that was similar, I did have the privilege of having a 1998 the other day, and I can say that those wines are still kicking. So if the lifeline or the lifespan is the same, certainly one to invest in. I wanted to speak a little bit more to the value and ask you guys, my perception in recent years is that the bottom has come up in pricing for Oregon Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So it's no longer quite as possible to find really, really good age-worthy Pinot and Chard under $30. But at the top level, when we're talking about the best wines you can find in Willamette Valley. And then you're looking at that compared to Burgundy's Premier Crus and Grand Crus. Our top level hasn't actually increased all that much. So you're still seeing a massive value for the best wines of the region. Do you think that's accurate? Do you think that there are a lot of value wines and I'm just missing them?
I would say it is an incredibly expensive place to farm and grow grapes in the Willamette Valley. I mean, we're planted on hillsides for quality reasons. And that means you do not naturally get high yields. That means you can't easily mechanize. Our vineyard stewards touch every vine 10 to 12 times throughout the growing season. Like, this is an expensive place to grow grapes, and it's expensive wine that results. And, the quality has to be there. That's how Oregon succeeds. It's certainly not with being even able to sell, a $5 or $10 bottle of wine. That's just not part of the economics of farming here.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, I think everyone in the Valley is really dedicated to delivering more quality at any price point, really, regardless of whether you're making the very top echelon or something that's more of an everyday drinking wine. It's about quality. That's how Oregon has always succeeded. That's how we've always led. So I think that's been sort of the focus for producers here for a long time.
And
I think the value has just kept going up also, even though farming costs have gone up and inflation has caused things like glass bottles and corks to be more expensive. I think that the collaborative nature of Oregon has helped raise the quality of everybody's wine. So the price might have been going up some, but so is the quality level. So that value remains excellent still. So yeah, as the price goes up, the quality also rises, and what is available and the diversity of the wines that we're making here continues to increase as well. So I think it's a place to keep people interested.
Yeah, I think Oregon was on a turning point, and they could have just stay as a very amazing region. But what is amazing about this, I've been here for 10 years, and every year I see just a desire for people to increase quality in so many aspects of it. And with proof, to Gina's point about farming, people more and more winery are trying to do more clean farming. It's more expensive, and organic farming is take a lot of, and I think we all do believe as a region that it's really increased quality of wine. Number two, as a community as a whole, we do have now 2 technical tastings that group almost winemakers from all of the Willamette Valley and sometimes a bit greater region of Oregon to just discuss the previous vintage. And this amount of collaboration in this room for one day, it's crazy, because we really, really see how we can just improve, and we really show ourselves naked in front of winemakers, and we're like, okay, wow. Sometimes you come home and you think about, my wine was okay, but I can do that better, and you learn a lot. And I think that's really engage people's mind to be better, and this is it's great. And so I think the price is higher for the lower value, but the quality is higher. So I don't think there's
And when you get the prices have gone up a bit, but it's the top level and everything in between. It's not reaching the unsustainable, what I think of as an unsustainable model that Burgundy has gotten to, where so many people are priced out at a certain level that you can't afford to consume these wines anymore.
My matrix is kind of, can a winemaker buy their own wine still? And if you can, then we're still doing all right.
So let's talk about sustainability, because that's in terms of pricing model, but also Thomas just mentioned that farming has been trending quite a bit towards organic biodynamic. We've been top in terms of percentage for biodynamic acreage for a long time. Of course, we can't beat out California because they have more acres planted than us, but in terms of percentage, we win. So can you talk about what's driving that push and why Oregon is such a sustainable place to make and grow wine?
I think that's always been part of the being a steward of the land here. Ever since we started growing grapes, everything that we planted originally is still dry farmed. I mean, having those grapevines be more self-sufficient makes the roots go down deeper, makes them find little micronutrients, makes the vines healthier, makes the fruit more complex and interesting. We also get more rain up here than a lot of other regions in the United States at the right times anyway. Like all of our rain pretty much comes between October and April every year. So it's not during the growing season, at least the height of grape growing. So we have a great water table that if you do have self-sufficient vines, they can tap into those water tables, even if it's a very dry year. So I think just having self-sufficient vines that do the work for you, and also maintaining an agricultural culture that is good for everybody involved, including the people that work in your vineyards, the animals that roam through your vineyards, the neighbors of your vineyard, you know, doing the right thing for the land and keeping it sustainable for generations to come is something that's always been important to Oregonians and farmers, and at least in our culture, and myself included. I'm sure Thomas and Gina agree with me that, yeah, keeping our land safe and sound for generations to come is something that us as farmers are kind of needing to do for the future.
We grow grapes, and this is not the main, obviously, like a nutritious thing for our food, right? But we still want to make wine. And so I think that there is that reason we need to be very conscious about what we're doing. I think Oregon, especially the Willamette Valley, has a special place because of its available water. I think it rains more than to give you an example, it rains more in Oregon than in Burgundy, just not at the same time. And so, which means that, we are in a really good spot compared to other regions to be able to sustain this farming, and for a long time. And I think this is why a lot of people have the eye on Oregon for that reason, which makes exciting. I think this makes this region desirable for growing. And I think another important piece of it, it's Gina mentioned the hillside. It's really it's a complex farming. It's complex planting. We cannot really, like, a word that I don't like that much. We can't scale Oregon. It's really hard to grow Oregon as much as California did, because land is not available to plant in massive acreage. And so we are in a very good spot.
I think that's an interesting comment. I was talking to someone in Napa, and they said the thing that saved Napa Valley was the agricultural trust. And if they hadn't had that, then they would have been paved over a long time ago. So
that's a great point. I mean, we have pretty tight land use laws here in Oregon, and a lot of that was driven by people in the early days of the wine industry, making sure that hillside properties are set aside for agricultural purposes and not for, housing, right? Housing is dedicated to the lower valley areas that aren't suitable for agriculture of this kind.
In terms of organizations that you guys see as driving sustainability, that you're part of or that you're looking at becoming part of, I know right before we started talking, Gina, we were talking about, or before we all got on, we were talking about a company in Oregon that's launching a program. They're called Ravino, and it's a bottle reuse system. And they are worked with a bunch of producers to create a mold they got most people to say, we like this mold enough that we're willing to put wine in it. And then Oregon, much as you all have been saying, has been concerned about environmental responsibility since the beginning. And we have the Oregon Bottle Recycling Center, and it's a really unique program. So it's already in place. You can see producers like Jess Pierce, when she put her Riesling in a beer bottle, it was because that was a reusable beer bottle. And with the Oregon Bottle Drop program, that can be washed and returned. So that's a cool program. You were talking about how you keep that in the system though, Gina. Can you talk about that a bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Ravino is a very exciting new possible endeavor in the Valley. I think the key is going to be so right now it's the local return, right, through the Oregon drop centers. So I think for producers, it's just, we have to figure out how do we get people to bring them back, right, so that we can refill them. That's where it succeeds, right? Glass recycling, great, very important, but to be able to reuse it is really critical for carbon neutrality. So the glass bottle production, there's a range of estimates, but it's generally between 40 and 50% of one's greenhouse gases as a winery is wrapped up in the glass. So, kegging is important, reusable bottles is important, alternative packaging is becoming increasingly important. Finding lightweight molds, very important, and something that I think most people in Oregon have already been working on for a long time now. The demand is great, I think, amongst producers, and the next step really is to engage the consumer so that they understand how important this is and what a contributing factor packaging can be, so that they're helping to push this question as well.
Any other organizations? When I know that Arlen, which you're now working with, works with Demeter, or is certified under Demeter, which has it has rules around soil building and how you do that, and requires it. So have you noticed anything with that property that you are thinking about Ribbon Ridge or more generally?
I mean, honestly, if I had unlimited funds and I could do whatever I wanted, I would do a lot of the same practices that Janice is doing at Arlen, having full farm agriculture going on, because, the more sheep and goats and cows and chickens you have grazing your property, the better it is for the overall ecosystem. The regenerative agriculture movement is huge right now in a lot of the Western states, and it takes a lot of investment in that farm that some people can't afford to do immediately. But I think any steps in that direction and becoming as sustainable as possible, even if you aren't certified by Demeter or by by organics or whatever, I think any steps in those direction are good steps. Doing things as well as you can possibly, naturally doing weeding with, baby doll sheeps or runner ducks or whatever you can do, can only benefit the whole ecosystem instead of putting poisons into the soil or into your grapes. I think doing those kinds of things, any steps like that are in the right direction. So we're live certified here, and we do as many steps towards organics as we can. We aren't certified in organics, but that doesn't mean that the effort isn't worth just as much as the certification.
So we talked about community a lot. Are any of you involved in Ahivoy or in, I know there's a new organization launching, and now I'm forgetting the name of it. So I apologize if anyone's on here and knows. But are any of you involved in Ahivoy or other efforts like that to involve community? The farm
legacy harvested, maybe that's the one.
Yeah, our legacy harvested too.
Yeah,
or roots. I think that's another
Roots
one.
farm, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think this is. Go ahead, Gina.
Go ahead, Tomas.
No, I think it's important to. I think with the society here, with the wine communities, has a lot of connection and can touch so many different people and a lot of people from different background and level in society are basically participating into the making of what we're doing. And if it's in the farming, if it's in the service, if it's in the winery. And I think that I think as a whole, like there was a lot of wake up call in the US in the last few years to like assist some underrepresented community to be to be helped by what we do and in a good way, by sharing and teaching and those associations are great. And I mean, we trying to help as much as we can. We work a lot with the Roots Fund, and we have mentees and it's great. And Haivo is an amazing one as well, in Oregon. Yeah.
One of our vineyard stewards just graduated through the IEVOY program, and he was raving about it. So we're trying to see if anyone else on the vineyard steward crew is interested in joining. So it is a great program. We're in our second year of participation with our Legacy Harvest, which is also really wonderful, run by a woman locally here named Taquette Bramlett. And our Legacy Harvest, it's dedicated to bringing in BIPOC people to the wine industry, particularly into production. And they're really amazing. They step through the whole process with support. They meet after harvest to have dinners. They do educational tours and events. They have a block party coming up in McMinnville pretty soon. Really, really good organization. And Salud has also been around for, I don't know, 35 years or something. So that was started in Oregon. And it was dedicated to, it's another auction that generates funds for vineyard stewards to provide healthcare, mobile healthcare essentially throughout the valley. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, there's an abundance, I would say, of interest, in social justice programs here in the valley. And I think that's one of the reasons why I stay engaged, I guess, in this work.
Yeah, that's all incredible organizations. I'm so glad we have so many of them, and there are so many people pushing for change in the valley. But I also want to open this up for questions. I know that we had one, and it was on ageability of 2021, but also on ageability of, and it was from Megan, but it seems that we already answered it live. I wanted to expand on that question and say, what would be your ideal drinking window? Do you think this is a personal, would you say that this is a personal decision, or that you do think that drinking windows fall within a certain range for 2021 for other vintages as well?
I'm a light. Go ahead. Sorry. No. Please. Ladies first. Sorry. I'm always like, I'm just like, okay.
I've always.
I'm sorry. Let's start with Thomas, and then we'll do Wynne.
Okay. So, sorry. I always thought that generally when we make wine, our generation, I think we tend to think wine, at least me, in a way that it needs to be drunk, not right off the bottling line, but like very soon after. Those wines to be fresh and delicious and such, but we really need to work hard to like make them age. And I think after that there's a variation between vintages. If you talk about 21 in general, I think once again, we opened them right now. We're so excited not having 2020. So like 2021, I'm like, it's like, they're delicious right now, but I can see with the amount of acidity is a beautiful 10, and we can just like go like 5 and sometimes a bit plus. And I think that in general in Oregon, for me in the last few years, I think only 18 was a vintage I would have kept a little bit under cellar, or just for a few years, or to open at this beautiful potential. But yeah, I think 5-10 years, I've had the chance with sometime in some of those event and association dinner and stuff to open older wine from Oregon, of collectors that share wine. And just, I mean, IPNC was last week, like opening some old 2090s. It's just, and you're like, you have a good time. Those wines are fun. So Oregon can age, yes.
Wynne?
I think I've always been brought up with the idea that wine is meant for aging. If anybody here knows my dad, and he's been part of the wine industry since the early 80s. He has a cellar that goes back. I mean, I've got half of it in my house and I don't even know what to do with it. It's like 70s and 80s and 90s. And so I think I've always been of the mindset of, when is the perfect window to open this? It's probably going to be 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, which is why we're still doing vertical tastings of our wines. But I think Oregon wines can age much better than a lot of people give them credits for. You know, if you look at some amazing Burgundies, they can go for decades as well. And there's no reason that Oregon wines stored under the right conditions can't do exactly the same thing. So we haven't even released our 21s yet. None of the white wines, yes, but the red wines haven't been released yet. And so I think that just speaks volumes to how long we think they'd be willing to go. I always see, you know, you bottle your wine here and it goes up a little progression up a hill for a while and it'll increase in quality. And then you hit this plateau eventually and the wine will stay on the plateau and eventually slowly decline, but that plateau can go on for ages. So that's one of the fun things about wine is every wine will act differently during that aging process. And everybody's sweet spot is somewhere different. Some people like it when they're really young and fresh and still going up the hill. And some people like them when they have a little bit of the age characteristics, but also some freshness. And some people like that earthiness at the very end. So kind of depends on your palate and the wine itself. So it's one of those things. We're never going to know everything about wine or how it ages, but it's fun to try throughout the process.
I definitely agree. Gina, do you have some thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I hate this question because I feel like it's so subjective, right? It's like, how do you like your wine, right? So I can tell you what I think. I tend to prefer wines from Oregon that are 10 to maybe 5 to 10 years, maybe 8 is kind of a sweet spot generally, depending on the vintage. I've had plenty of much older wines and people will geek out about them, right? And that's fine. I kind of like some of the fresher, more youthful qualities that you don't tend to get after 20 years or so. But, you know, like, I don't know, it depends. Most people will come home and drink them right away, right? And that's fine. Like, if that's what you want to do, that's okay. I think it's more about what you like and what your palate is and what your experience is. And you're only going to do that if you try some stuff out, you know, like try a few wines and see what you like after a year or 5 years or 10. And that takes some patience, but that's the only way you figure out what you like.
You could buy a barrel, you could cellar it for 20 years, grab a couple bottles out every year. All right, if there are any more questions, quickly pop those in the Q&A, but otherwise we did answer the one live question and we're going to wrap up. If you guys have any final comments on 2021, other than you should go get some 2021 and put it in your cellar and sit on it for as long as you would like before drinking it. For me, it's going to be probably around the 10-year mark. I'm gonna go till 10. I might take a couple out and check on them before then, but
That's why you buy a full case.
That's
and you
where
open
I'm-
a bottle a year, right?
yeah, exactly. Buy a full case, open a bottle a year. Thank you guys so much. And yeah, I'll see you at the auction on the 10th.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Morgan. This is going to be a great auction. I can't wait to try everybody's wine.
I
Yeah.
cannot wait. It's going to be so much fun. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.